Good there. Good on YouTube. Now on Facebook. Oh man, I hear Lincoln.
Can you hear him? Uh-oh.
Oh man, he does have those pops, man.
He woke up. He's awake now.
All right.
No, he's in the shower, so let me check on him. You can go and start.
All right, go ahead. Well, folks, that just gives you a little insight into type of show we're running here at Walking Through History. It's real life. We are dads having to deal with kiddos from time to time, and while Alan is running off and taking care of his newborn son, I guess he's almost about a month old now. Lincoln, while he's running off to take care of him, I want to introduce our text for today, which is Exodus chapter 15 and verse 22 all the way through the end of chapter 18. We are going to be looking at the journey that the children of Israel make from Egypt, making their way towards Sinai. Of course, Exodus chapter 20 is the famous text where the law is given to the people. The Ten Commandments, most specifically, are given to the people. A very well-known text there. Almost there. Should be hitting that either next class or class after that. But today we want to focus on getting to that point. Again, we're beginning in Exodus chapter 15 and verse 22. They have come up out of Egypt. The people have, as they're led by Moses and Aaron. They have spent some time on the Exodus routes. The Lord had them move and behave in such a way that it stirred up Pharaoh to where he would pursue after the children of Israel. His arrogance and hardness of heart come on display again. And in this moment, the Lord has the opportunity to show his ultimate power, the fact that he will be victorious over anyone who might try to stand before him and try to interrupt his plan. That's been something that we have seen time and time throughout the Bible thus far, is people going against the plans that God has made. In the garden, the plan was for mankind to dwell there and to live in harmony with the Lord and live in harmony with the creation and to rule over the creation. And yet we have the serpent that tries that does successfully throw a wrench into those plans. Again, as the people go out there to live in harmony with one another and to love the Lord, but we see in Genesis chapter 6 that people hate one another. Everything that fills their heart is that which is evil and wicked. We go to Tower Babel in Genesis chapter 11. The plans that God has are being broken by the people there, and then they're scattered. So just time and time again, we see plans that the Lord has established being challenged by mankind. Well, here the plan for the Lord is for his people to travel up from Egypt and into the land of Canaan. But what does Pharaoh do? He seeks to disrupt those plans, and the Lord shows his power over him in swallowing up not just him, but his advisors, his generals, his warriors, his chariots, their horses. They're all swallowed up in the Red Sea. And we have the beginning portion of Exodus chapter 15, this great song or a poem, we might say, of Moses and the children of Israel as they reflect on the power of God and the victory that he has given them over the enemy of Egypt and Pharaoh. We come to Exodus chapter 22, or excuse me, Exodus chapter 15 and verse 22. And we read in this text that Moses then led Israel on from the Red Sea, and they went out to the wilderness of Shur. They journeyed for 3 days in the wilderness without finding water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water at Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was named Mara. The people grumbled to Moses, "What are we going to drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he threw it, being the tree, into the water became drinkable. The Lord made a statute and ordinance for them at Mara, and he tested them there. He said, "If you will carefully obey the Lord your God, do what is right in his sight, pay attention to his commands, and keep all his statutes, I will not inflict any illnesses on you that I inflicted on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 date palms, and they camped there by the water. Unfortunately, Alan, kind of like Lincoln, was just a little bit upset. The children here are upset because they feel as if they're not being provided for. And this is the first of, by my count, I think 3, possibly 4 instances in this text where they grumble, they complain against the Lord because they feel like the Lord is not providing them what they have. And they're even going to go so far later on as to say, "Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? Why didn't you just leave us there?" And they actually go say it in chapter 16, where they claim that they were sitting by pots of meat and ate all the bread they wanted. Alan, how sad is it? And yet, what a great lesson this teaches us, that we cannot let down our guard in regards to the possibility of losing hope, losing trust, and losing faith in God. If we ever rest on our laurels and think that everything's just going to be smooth, then whenever difficulties come, as they have here, well, they begin to grumble and complain. Uh, since you were gone, Alan, good afternoon to you. Thanks for being on today. What do you have to share with us here in this particular section of the text?
Well, I highlighted the thing that makes me laugh. They've literally they're 3 days after the Red Sea crossing. So this isn't something, this isn't
It
months
didn't
later,
take
years
long.
later. It really didn't take long, which if you remember, they were kind of grumbling even on the other side of the Red Sea. They were complaining that, the were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here and have Pharaoh's army kill us? So now they're on the other side, despite seeing this great deliverance. Well, like you mentioned, I think the point of these stories we're going to read today is just showing that not only does God deliver, but that's not the end of his interaction with his people. He's going to provide for them, but it's not necessarily, right away. They're going to have what they need, but there's usually some testing involved to just gauge their level of compliance and faith. And so they didn't get this water right away. They have to journey about 3 days for it. So uh, I think what God is doing is teaching them reliance on Him, and clearly they're going to fail over and over again. They keep as soon as it gets a little bit close to, they've obviously 3 days. That's about a good amount of time for them to have run out of whatever water they were carrying. And obviously they're getting thirsty. People can only go about 3 days without water. So there's a good chance that they're at the end of their, supply of water right here. So it is getting dire, but God wants them to just believe and trust that He will provide for them, and that's exactly what He does. The Lord shows Moses this tree. I think it's interesting too that each time, maybe not with the manna, but with both the water and also with the deliverance from the Amalekites, Moses is involved with this. It's not just the Lord doing something apart from Moses. He makes sure that the deliverance comes, or the provision comes from the Lord through the avenue of Moses. And I think that's just to kind of continue to verify him as uh, the leader, the prophet, the one that they should believe, the one appointed by God to lead his people. Because remember, verse 24, they're grumbling to Moses, or uh, they're grumbling to God in a sense, but they're also sometimes rebelling. And there's a threat against Moses a lot of these times too. So the Lord is not just doing his own thing apart from Moses. He wants Moses to be uh, the avenue through which this provision comes, just to show his importance, and to tie God and Moses together, to where they can't be separated.
Right. It's important to remember that Moses wasn't just some random person that found himself in this leadership role. He was handpicked by the Lord. He was the one that was chosen along with Aaron to be this spokesperson for God. And as we can see, I think that's a common theme in Scripture. When you are the spokesperson for God, often you get a tough go whenever it comes to dealing with people. Moses here, being the leader for Israel, he was treated kind of poorly for that, we might say, even treated very poorly at times. Think about the prophets that were often speaking for God, they were often mistreated. Think about Jesus himself was mistreated for speaking on behalf of God. The apostles and other inspired people, even today, whenever we speak up for God, it's not uncommon for us to be mistreated whenever things aren't going the way that people want them to go. One thing I'll add, Alan, here is just something that I haven't mentioned yet. I don't think up to this point, but just for people to be aware of as they're reading through the Exodus text, look out for things that relate to trees, not just trees, but also mountaintops and garden type imagery as well. Those type of images or those type of places and things like a tree, for example, those often stand as places where God is. Think about the Garden of Eden. Well, it contained what? A tree, the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We see the Lord being there in that place. Think about the number of places, the oaks of Mamre, which come to mind in regards to times that Abraham interacted with the Lord. Here, look at verse number 25, that he cried out to the Lord. The Lord showed him what? Showed him a tree. Well, there is the Lord's divine presence here, and it's signified by this tree. What did they toss into the water? The tree. The tree healed the water in a sense and made it drinkable. Once we get down to verse 27, they gave him to Elim, which Elim, I believe, has a root word that refers to God. Um, they came to Elim, the El part, where they actually, I believe, if I'm correct, this is a plural form for the word God or deity, something like that, where there were 12 springs and 70 date palms, and they camped there by the water. They came to a place that God had led them to where they were provided for. Here it's signified as a spring or as a garden where trees are involved. Once you see that, just go through and look at the places where the people really interact with God. Look what we're going to see whenever we get to Exodus 19, Exodus 20. Where does Moses interact with God? On a mountaintop. On a mountaintop. Where have the patriarchs up to this point, where have they often encountered God? At trees, even at wells at certain points would be a garden spring type of imagery. Just something to keep in mind whenever we read through the text, you see these things pop up. You often see interaction between God and his people.
I highlighted those two numbers as well. Those are pretty obviously some common numbers throughout the Bible too, and I think what's happening here, of course, 12, matching up with the 12 tribes. 70 we'll see later is going to be the number of the elders, I believe, that are appointed um, to help Moses in a couple chapters. But, I think what these numbers do, obviously, they're usually make you think of other things where that number is used, but we'll see that God, when He's providing, He provides He provides what we need,
Yes.
and
There is no shortage.
there's no
We are
shortage,
not left wanting or needing whenever God provides.
and sometimes we'll see with especially with the manna later on, that
Yeah.
it's not, and sometimes it's not in abundance.
Mm-hmm.
It's just exactly what we need. And I highlighted in chapter 26, for I am the Lord who heals you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find that interesting. He's saying, I will not inflict any of the illnesses if you obey, keep my statutes. But notice, like, who needs healing? It's people that are sick. So, the Lord's not saying that you'll never have illness, you'll never have sickness, you'll never have bad things. But if you pay attention to his commands, keep all his statutes,
Mm-hmm.
then, it's the Lord who will bring that healing. The Lord, whether that be physical healing from an ailment or just the healing from the disease of sin. That's I think that's pretty key there for for the remainder of scriptures as well. And that's what we want. I mean, I think it's a very bold of us to, to to assume that if we follow God and all his commands that we'll have, great riches and power and all these wonderful, abundance of worldly things. I don't think that's I guess that's the prosperity gospel that some people like to follow. But what does the Lord promise to provide? He provides just the right amount of water or manna or healing. And I
Mhm.
mean, some people aren't happy. That's not enough for some people. But I think as Christians, we should be happy with the Lord just providing those things for us. I mean, exactly what we need to, our daily bread as we pray about in the New Testament.
My sister and I were talking yesterday and talking about various things. She brought up Isaiah 43 and verse 10. You are my witnesses. This is the Lord's declaration, and my servant whom I have chosen, so that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. No God was formed before me, and there will be none after me. I I am the Lord. Well, what does God want to focus on in this text, Isaiah 43 and verse 11? Besides me, there is no Savior. I alone declared, saved, and proclaimed, and not some foreign God among you. Verse 25 says that I sweep away your transgressions for my own sake and remember your sins no more. If we want to talk about the ultimate healing that God brings, that's what it is. It's the healing that comes when our sins are not counted against us any longer, when we no longer carry the guilt, the burden of sin. Who makes that possible? It's not Pharaoh. It's not the gods of Egypt. It's not going to be the gods of the land of Canaan. No, it's going to be the true, almighty, powerful God, which is Yahweh, the one that there was no God before him, and there will be none after him because there will be no after him. He always just has been. And here we see the Lord showing his power. Something so random. There's bitter water. What does he do? He says, toss a tree in it. Tosses the tree in it. It becomes pure. It gives them exactly what they need. And what you just allude to, Alan, he is going to continue to do that time and time and time again. He's going to give them exactly what they need in that moment. And in that moment, what we're going to see now in verse 1 in chapter 16 is that the entire Israelite community departed from Elim and came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had left the land of Egypt. The entire Israelite community grumbled. There it is. We saw it in 16, or excuse me, we saw it in 15 and verse 24. We see it here again in 16 and verse 2. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, he brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. This way I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. The second time we've seen that, we saw this testing language back up in verse number 25 of chapter 15 as well. Let's see here. This way I will test them, see whether or not they will follow my instructions. Verse number 5 of chapter 16, on the sixth day, when they prepare when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, this evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the Lord's glory, because he has heard your complaints about him. For who are we that you complain about us? Moses continued, the Lord will give you meat to eat this evening, and all the bread you want in the morning, for he has heard the complaints you are raising against him. Who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. And then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. And as Aaron was speaking to the entire Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud the Lord's glory appeared. The Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. I'll tell you, Alan, what stands out to me in this text is, and I believe it's going to be further stressed and emphasized as we go throughout the remainder of this text, is just how patient the Lord is with these people. We're in the second story of this journey that is detailed for us. And we know that there was so much more to this journey than what we have written here. Just as John says at the end of his gospel account, there were many more signs and wonders done by Jesus that I simply couldn't record in this book because the book would be too big for the world itself to contain. There was so much more that happened in this journey than what we have. Yet here we are 2 for 2 on stories that are precipitated by grumbling. To me, the Lord's patience here is certainly overwhelming.
And it's interesting. We do have several of these right here, and we'll see later on when these types of things are still occurring 1-2 years later. That's when the Lord's patience wears a little more thin,
That's
if
when
you
we
will.
get the snaky snakes.
So that's when you get the snakes. That's when you get, the 40 years of wandering. He wants to just, wipe them all out, start fresh again. In Numbers 13 or 14 there. So yeah, he starts off. He's giving them some training, if you will, and rightly so. I mean, this is a newly birthed nation. You'll notice, there are some tests here. I find it interesting. We mentioned they traveled 3 days from the Red Sea. Well, remember they talked about going 3 days into the wilderness to worship. So I'm wondering. I mean, if you look at the map, they should be able to be at Sinai by now, but they're going a lot slower than they should. And I think that is because of these tests to kind of gauge and see, they need some maturing before they're going to stand before the God of heaven on Mount Sinai and receive the real big laws. I mean, they're just, God's given them some little baby things right here just to follow. With the manna, just don't go out on the seventh day and get more. You're going to get twice as much on Friday. Pretty simple instructions, but even those simple instructions were disobeyed, and Moses is already getting a little peeved off at him here. But yeah, God's at least, he's easing them in. He's not just throwing the 10 Commandments at them on, in chapter 16 right after they leave the Red Sea. So God understands the people, and he's, like you said, he's patient with them, definitely. And they grumble. I mean, the Israelites grumble each time. Verse 2, it's always the Israelites grumble there, which that word is much more loaded than just, oh, I'm hungry. This is a term of, close to rebellion. If not the word rebellion, then somewhere very close to rebellion right here. So that's a more loaded term than we see it in the English. But the Lord never says, the Lord is angry with them and then he, rains bread from heaven. Just says the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven in verse 4, and he gives them all these instructions.
And you're right. It's good to point out that this is a test, just as he tests them in the language of verse 25 of chapter 15. Well, what's the test? The test is to carefully obey the Lord your God, to do what is right in his sight, to pay attention to the commands. This is the test of your loyalty, of your trust, of your faith in me. Well, here is another test for them. Let's see how much you're willing to just listen to me, to obey the commands that I give to you. So let's see what happens. Verse number 13 of chapter 16. So at evening, remember what we just read is the Lord saying, this is what's going to happen. So here's the fulfillment of it. So at evening, quail came and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, there were fine flakes on the desert surface, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread of the Lord. It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. And he goes through and rehashes what we just read together. Gather as much of it as each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual, according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. So the Israelites did this. Notice that some gathered a lot, some a little. And when they measured it by the quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus, and the person who gathered a little had no shortage. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat. And Moses said to them, no one is to let any of it remain until morning. I think this is another portion of this test. But they didn't listen to Moses. Some people left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. Therefore Moses was angry with them. They gathered it every morning. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 4 quarts apiece, and all the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He told them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil, and set aside everything left over to be kept until morning. So they set it aside until morning as Moses had commanded, and it didn't stink or have maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you won't find any in the field. For 6 days you will gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Yet on the Sabbath day, some of the people went out to gather, and they did not find any. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? Understand that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he will give you 2 days' worth of bread. Each of you stay where you are. No one is to leave his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the Sabbath day. The house of Israel named the substance manna. It resembled coriander seed. It was white and tasted like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. 2 quarts of it are to be preserved throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses told Aaron, take a container and put 2 quarts of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be preserved throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the testimony to be preserved. And the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came into the inhabited land. They ate manna until they reached the border of the land of Canaan. They used a measure called an omer, which held 2 quarts, or other translations tell us that is 1/10 of an ephah. So, Alan, here it is. They have this test before them, and in many ways they did well. But once we get down a little further to the we might call it a pseudo Sabbath day in a sense. Maybe some of the early teachings establishing this Sabbath day idea and principle, they didn't do so well. But as you mentioned, I think verses 17 to 20 is a great few verses here to just illustrate what the Lord was doing for them. He gave them exactly what they needed, not too little and not too much.
And we'll see this is what happens the rest of their time in the wilderness. They have exactly what they need. They're wandering. They don't have a way of, they don't have storehouses, so there's no point in, gathering up and 2 weeks worth or a month's worth of food, because they're moving. They have to be ready to go. So that's not the time for that. So the time is, or the purpose of this is to trust in God for your daily things. And like we're told later in the New Testament, don't worry about tomorrow. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Worry about today and let God worry about tomorrow. And that's exactly what he did. He's trying to teach them here by, making sure that everyone had enough, no matter if they gathered a lot or they gathered a little, they always had enough, the right amount. And then if they didn't, they left it till morning, then it was useless anyway. It bred worms and stank. So they're learning to trust in God for their day-to-day needs. And it's really interesting here. This the sixth day is kind of obviously shows that God is in complete control, because on the sixth day they gather twice as much and it doesn't stink. They do store up for one day, and it doesn't stink or it doesn't breed these worms like it did for the other days. So clearly God is in control of that, whether it stays good or not. And this one's real interesting to me, because later on we're gonna read about the Sabbath year that they were supposed to have in the land of Canaan. Basically, what would happen is for 6 years they would grow their crops, just like they normally would. Well, that seventh year was supposed to leave their fields fallow. They weren't supposed to plant anything on that seventh year. And God would do the same thing on the sixth year. He would give them a really great, bumper crop that year, and they would have twice as much to cover for that year where they weren't doing anything. They were basically resting that year.
Right.
That sounds pretty good. Take a year off of your hard labors in the field, and that's supposed to be kind of like a year Sabbath, just like the weekly Sabbath they have. You don't hear about that anytime except when the law is given about that. So clearly, you see the result of these Sabbaths, and that's going to be one of the main reasons why the people are sent into captivity generations from now, is just because of their lack of concern for the Sabbath. They just never they don't worry about it. It doesn't have that importance like it should. They work on the Sabbath. They don't care about that Sabbath year or the year of Jubilee. All those similar types of things are just completely forgotten. And you see kind of the beginnings of it here. They already are missing the point of the whole thing.
Right. Something we talked about before we went on live, Alan, was there seems to be a couple of things here that are out of place. The one you just mentioned is the Sabbath. Unless I missed something, I don't see anything about the Sabbath being spoken of up to this point. So to me, I'm thinking he uses the word Sabbath. You were to use this click to verse 23, tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. This seems like it would be a very strange word to them, something they never heard before. But somebody might come back and say, well, hey, listen, Genesis has already happened. They've already read that, right? Well, no, probably not. I don't know any evidence that shows that they had the Genesis story up until this point. That seems out of place to an extent. But something else that might seem out of place is what we see later on in verse number 34. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron placed it, and that it being the 2 quarts of the manna being preserved, placed it before the testimony to be preserved. Well, what's the testimony? As Alan and I were talking, we're thinking that this is in reference to the Ark of the Covenant. And if this is a reference to Ark of the Covenant, that's another problem here. The Ark hasn't been created yet. So, Alan, how do we make sense of 2 things seemingly being out of place here in this text? Since, by all accounts, the Sabbath has not yet been established. They don't have any knowledge of it. And how can the Ark of the Covenant possibly be here if it hasn't even been created yet?
At this point, a couple theories, I guess. The Sabbath, although there hasn't been a commandment, consecrating the Sabbath, it's not hard to assume that the idea of a day of rest to commemorate God's rest in the creation hasn't already started to occur in a minor way in their history. Just maybe Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or generations before, that just started as almost a tradition, and then God continues that with the formal dedication of the Sabbath. So that's a possibility. It's already been in place. It's not commanded in the same way, but just that part of a common tradition. But for all of these, mentioning the Ark of the Testimony, mentioning the Sabbath, and just mentioning all of these places, we mentioned Mara. It's called Mara today. Well, this is clearly showing that this is written. This isn't written. This isn't a live. They're not live tweeting the this as they travel. This isn't being written. This isn't being written, live. This is obviously being written after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And how long after the fact, we don't know. Clearly, Moses is the focal point of most of the Pentateuch. And we've talked about how we assumed. I mean, Moses would be uniquely qualified to write all these and record all these things
Right.
down. Does that mean that every single word that we see in here is the exact same thing that Moses wrote down? I highly doubt it. I think he, recorded these events. Maybe perhaps Genesis he wrote in its entirety to the most part, but was it what was the final form that we see exactly what Moses wrote? No, I think Moses wrote the bulk of it, and then over time there's been either little additions, just changing names like Mara. Well, if they just used an old name that no one is familiar with that place, that wouldn't really mean anything. So 100 years later, you can go in and say, oh, that's Mara. Um, I heard the song, Istanbul, Constantinople is, that song. I mean, names of cities and places change. So you might never have heard of Constantinople, but if you've heard of Istanbul, which I think is what it is now, then you know exactly what it's talking about. If I just said Constantinople and you didn't know what that was, it wouldn't mean anything. So,
right.
So there is going to be a lot of that throughout the Pentateuch, just updating the names of things and little blurbs like this. With verse 34 talking about the testimony. Well, in the context of this passage, it hasn't been made yet, but you can go in and say, oh, by the way, this manna. This is important information to know that later on Aaron placed it before the testimony to be preserved, just as the Lord commanded. So, and that fits here because the Lord's making a command to preserve this, and then you're notating that command is fulfilled, just not at the moment because it couldn't be fulfilled at the moment. It's fulfilled later. So it's good just to remember that that there are going to be edits and additions and little things that until the completed form of this book. And that's not to say that those additions, what we have now is only partially inspired. No, I think all of those are part of the inspiration of God.
Right.
But did every word of the Pentateuch written by Moses? Probably not. I would assume he didn't write the last part where he died.
That would be a little difficult.
That would be a little tough.
Unless he wrote it prophetically, but
yeah, but it doesn't have to be that prophetic.
Exactly. And I think a lot of this comes down to, because whenever you make statements like this, that if you make any sort of statement, there were edits done to the text, or people went in and updated the language to help the people understand. People at that moment, they're going to say, hold on, so you're claiming that it's not inspired. I would not be making that claim at all. I would say that these people who were doing this, they were still working under the inspirational guidance of God. But I guess it all comes down to, how do you view inspiration? If you view inspiration as somebody sitting at a desk or whatever they had for a desk, and their eyes roll in the back of their head and they just start writing stuff, then yeah, that's probably not going to fit with what we have here. But if you believe in inspiration being that God was working with these men as they were trying to record the true history, and as they were trying to use this text, we have to remember this is an educational text. This text was written to inform people of their history and to teach them things concerning God. To me, what we have here is, especially, and one we haven't mentioned yet, is verse 36. Verse 36 in parentheses, they used a measure called an omer, which held 2 quarts, or as other translations say, a tenth of an ephah. Well, why is that there? Because by the time this was written, nobody knew what an omer was. That type of measurement was probably well archaic at this point. So they're having to give these parenthetical statements, or these qualifying statements, to help the reader, the current reader, as is being written, understand exactly what is being said. So someone might be looking at the Ark of the Covenant. Now be wondering, well, what's that little piece what's that jar? What's that stuff in it? Well, they go right here. They understand, and they not only understand what it is, but they have the roots of how that came to be in the text. No, at this very moment, as the Lord commanded, Aaron did not place it in it because it didn't exist yet. But Aaron later down the road is going to hold on to this piece of this container that has the manna in it. And once the ark comes to be, then he places it in there to preserve for the people so that they have this thing to learn by. I think
30,
that looking at
verse
text,
36
things right.
is funny because, who's they? Well, Moses was there. Wouldn't he just say, we used a measure called an omer, which
I,
is two
I
quarts?
I think that's another evidence for editing that.
Yeah. So you're talking about those people
Right,
way back then
right.
that I'm writing about right now.
And there are some people who would be very good options for people who would be able to edit such a text. Joshua, I think, would be one. Eleazar, the son of Moses, probably be another one. There are people that would, to say there's editing is to not claim nefarious action. It's also to not claim a lack of inspiration. I think all these are done under the umbrella of inspiration, especially considering the fact that I think we just kind of work on the belief that this is Moses, right? Do we have, to my knowledge, can't think of anything where it says Moses wrote the first five. Am I right there? Or am I mistaken?
He doesn't write that himself, but
Okay.
we use that, we little clues throughout the text and God commanded Moses to write this down.
Right.
And
If there was a statement that said everything written here was written by Moses, okay, I would take that at face value. I would believe that. But the fact that that is not said, and the fact that we have these type of text, which give evidence for editing, again, not trying to deny inspiration at all, fully believe it's all of God. But let's think very practically here about how this text would be constructed in such a way that would be most beneficial for people to understand it and to learn from it, and then to be able to grow from the understanding. I think that might give the best understanding of what's going on. Now, there are some people that take this completely sideways and run on this whole other thinking that Moses didn't write any of this and that this is a very late writing. Well, of course, the goal of doing that is to debunk the text, to show it's not being legitimate. Obviously, that's not our anything we're trying to do, but we're trying to be honest here. This seems to be something that gives credence to the idea of Moses doing the majority of the writing, yes, but other people had a hand in the writing as well and brought it to be what it is now for us and what we see as being the Old Testament, particularly the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Sure.
All right, Alan, let's read some more here in the text, chapter 17 and verse 1. The entire Israelite community left the wilderness of Sin, moving from one place to the next according to the Lord's commands. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. First, we have bitter water. Let's see here in verse 16. They just complained because they didn't have what they thought they needed. Well, now they have no water at all, the text tells us. So the people complained to Moses, give us water to drink. Moses replies to them, why are you complaining to me? Why are you testing the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you ever bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what should I do with these people? In a little while, they will stone me. I think that gives credence to what you're saying, Alan. That word grumble goes a lot further than just that whole thing. And it is a rebellion. It is a threat to rise up against. Moses is saying that here, they're going to kill me soon. So Lord, verse number 5, answered Moses, go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff you struck the Nile with in your hand and go. I'm going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. And when you hit the rock, water will come out of it and the people will drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites complained and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Alan, here is episode 3 of 3, where they complain because they don't feel like their needs are being met. And Moses here, where we see God continuing his patience, we see, I think, Moses running out of patience a bit here. He is at least a little more than slightly worried that the grumblings of the people might end up putting him in a really bad spot.
And Moses does the right thing. He cries out to the Lord.
That's right. That's a good point.
The people keep complaining to Moses. Of course, I mean, when they're complaining to Moses, they're complaining to God, which is why he says right there, why are you testing the Lord? I think that's interesting too. Before it was the Lord offering a test to them, just a test of their faith. But now you have a different kind of test that's flipped over. And now the Israelites are testing, and this isn't the same, that's the same word, but it's different meaning at this point. The Lord testing is like a quiz or test or, a teaching. Well, the Israelites testing the Lord is testing his patience and his mercy and his grace and his love. So that's a different form of the word there. It's interesting here too. The Lord, in this instance, he is going to remind them of some things that have happened already, because he commands Moses to take that staff that you struck the Nile with in your hand. Well, I mean, that was the very staff that he struck water before, and what happened? It turned to blood. It was undrinkable. So from that same staff, that same God, that same power, now you will have water from a rock that is, from something that is undrinkable, you have something to drink. So a complete reversal using that same thing, just showing God's control of both situations from the very beginning all the way until now. And trying to, again, all of these tests, all of these stories are there to try to get the Israelites to have some faith and trust. I mean, this is still the same God. He's already, I mean, at this point, he's already given them water once. So why wouldn't he do it again? He's provided for them their food. So why do you keep complaining about the same things when he's already provided that? He clearly can provide that for you. So just talk to him, say, hey, Lord, we need water. I mean, that's all they have to do. But the people are getting more and more, this time's even more that it says grumbled again, but, Moses is clearly thinking he's about to get stoned. So this is much more, the people are getting a little more rowdy here, it looks like.
You brought up last time concerning the scenes with the Red Sea and the swallowing up of Pharaoh, how the New Testament keys in on that in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Well, here we looked at another text like Romans chapter 15 and verse 4, where it says, for whatever was written in the past was written for our instruction, so that we may have hope through endurance and through the encouragement from the scriptures. These texts were not only good to remind the people, the contemporary Israelites of their time who were receiving this text, not just to remind them of the need not to test the Lord, but also as a good reminder for us that we don't need to complain or grumble. And something else stands out to me before we move on is the end of verse number 7. This is what they were saying: is the Lord among us or not? What they had to realize is the Lord here wasn't the variable. He was not the variable. He was the constant. He was going to continue to provide and do what he needed to do for these people. The real question ought to have been, are we going to be with him or not? Are we going to trust in him or not? See, people had it backwards. They were thinking that the Lord might not be the trustworthy one whenever he absolutely was. They needed to turn that around and look at themselves and consider whether they were going to stick with the Lord or not.
A key verse, back in chapter 16, we didn't talk about it, but in chapter 16, verse 12, I've highlighted it here. What's the point of all these? Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Yep. So is the Lord among us? The Lord am. That means the Lord is. So that term, not only implies that he is in the present, but he is everywhere. The Lord am, the Lord is. So we'll see, and that's the first commandment we'll see in chapter 20. I am the Lord your God. They're wondering if the Lord is there time and time again. The Lord's teaching them who he is, that he's always there, that he is always with them. And the whole point of all of this journey, even through Sinai, is that they will know that they're learning about the Lord their God. And even back in with the Egyptians, so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. That's the whole point of all of this, is for them to learn who God is. And the crazy thing, the amazing thing about God is that's not just one thing you can learn in one sitting. This is a long journey. And even with all of these tests, all of these signs and wonders, all these deliverances that God provides, all these provisions that God provides, all these laws that God's going to provide, we still don't have a full picture of God until in the fullness of time, his fullness comes to earth in the form of Christ. So we're learning bits and pieces about God throughout the entire Old Testament until we can to hopefully recognize when God actually comes to this earth, we can recognize him. And of course, very few recognized him because they did not learn the lessons from the people of Israel all those many years ago.
That's right. That's great. Great connection there. Absolutely. Here at Rephidim, Allen, we also read about a struggle they had, not just internally among the people, but actually from an external force. We read that Amalek came in Exodus 17 and verse 8 and fought against Israel. Moses said to Joshua, select some men for us and go and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the hilltop with God's staff in my hand. Joshua did as Moses had told him and fought against Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up on top of the hill. And while Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he put his hand down, Amalek prevailed. And when Moses' hands grew heavy, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat down on it. And then Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other side, so that his hands remained steady until the sun went down. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his army with the sword. The Lord then said to Moses, write this down on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua. I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner. And he said, indeed, my hand is lifted up toward the Lord's throne, and the Lord will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. Alan, we just made the comment about this not being live tweeted, yet here we do have an instance where the Lord tells Moses right here in this moment to write this thing down so that Joshua will be reminded of it from time to time. But this, Alan, again, we're talking about the first of a series of events. Well, here's the first time that we see Israel outside of Egypt having to deal with someone who is going to come to be a difficulty for them in the future as they try to establish themselves as a true people within this new land. What do you want to share with us about Amalek and his people coming up against Moses in this moment?
Nice thing on Olive Tree, I can just click on little links here, so it makes it easy for me. Well, if you look here in Amalek, I've got the note pulled up here, but it actually tells us in Genesis chapter 36 and verse 12, he's a grandson of Esau. So this is supposedly this is a close relative of the Israelites. So the fact that they're attacking them just shows their wickedness as a people, and helps us understand why God comes down on them so hard. Right. He tells them, I mean, it's not often God says, write this down. That's usually something pretty big, write this down in a scroll. He tells John, the Revelator, later on.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me of the country song.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, when God says, write this down, he's just basically saying this is important. This will happen. And he says, write it down as a reminder to Joshua. So I think this is supposed to be either for Joshua to write down when he's completing the Pentateuch, like we've talked about, or for Joshua to go back and, be the one to wipe out Amalek. Well, if we keep reading throughout the Bible, we know Amalek sticks around all the way to the days of Saul. He was supposed to destroy them, and then he didn't. And we see Amalekite comes up again in the book of Esther. Haman, the bad guy, was a descendant of Agag, who was a descendant of Amalek. So it's going to be a while until Amalek is completely blotted out. But it's, I mean, this blurb is here just to kind of show some of those future stories, why they don't like the Amalekites and why they're supposed to be blotted out. One interesting thing here is having Aaron and Hur there with Moses. Aaron, we know, is going to be the high priest. So, and Hur is actually one of the leaders of the tribe of Judah. Well, Judah was obviously a pretty important tribe because it's through Judah is the kings and the seed would follow. So you've really got three pillars here. You've got the priest, the king, and the prophet Moses, all in unison, and it takes the three of them to support Moses' hands, and it's only through those three, and of course by God's in by God here that they prevail against Amalek. So uh, so I see kind of how the ideal, almost like the ideal leadership or government situation here.
Right.
The priest united with the king, united with the prophets, all to lift up by their hands, lift up the Israelites. So it's kind of a little bit of, I guess, metaphor there in this story, um, but to put it in the context of what we've been reading, this is God providing for them again in a different way. He's given them water, he's given them food, manna and quail, and now he's defending them against attack from an evil people. So
Right.
all of these things is them getting to know who God is, how powerful he is, so that they can come before him on Mount Sinai later on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hur is going to show up again in chapter 24 and verse 14. Whenever Moses and Joshua go up onto the mountain, Aaron and Hur are told to be the point men at that instance, where if they have any issues, they need to go to those two men for them to seek guidance from. Speaking of seeking guidance and learning, we have an instance here in chapter 18 of Jethro, who is Moses' father-in-law, showing back up onto the scene and gives us a little bit of background information about what's been going on during this time in regards to Moses' wife and his two sons. We read in chapter 18 and verse 1 that Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for God's people Israel when the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back along with her two sons, one of whom was named Gershom, because Moses had said, I've been a resident alien in a foreign land, and the other Eleazar, because he had said, the God of my father was my helper and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Moses' father-in-law Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and then kissed him. And they asked each other how they had been and went into the tent. Moses recounted to his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that confronted them on the way, and how the Lord rescued them. Jethro rejoiced over the good things the Lord had done for Israel when he had rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro exclaimed, who rescued you from the power of Egypt and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people from under the power of Egypt. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. Alan, as I mentioned, we get a little insight here as to where Moses' family has been during this whole ordeal. We probably haven't given much thought to it. We would just probably assume that they're here among the people, doing what the rest of the people are doing, but it seems that they've been sent back to the land of Midian to be with Jethro, who is Moses' father-in-law, which emphasizes a number of times. And now Jethro comes to him once he's heard of everything that's going on. He comes to him to check in, and I don't know, maybe this is at the point where he's going to bring Zipporah and Gershom and Eleazar back to Moses so that they can all be reunited again as a family. We see that here within the text, but I really love what Jethro takes away from all this. I think verses 10 and 11 show us great insight as to what ought to be the proper understanding that comes as a result of what has taken place. The people here have seen everything that Moses is telling Jethro, the people have seen firsthand. And yet, in this moment, Jethro, I think, has a more proper response to what is told him than the very people who have seen these things firsthand. What do you think about the response of Jethro, especially compared to the response of Israel up to this point?
Oh yeah, I mean, what did we read throughout the plagues? You know, we highlighted the word no, that Pharaoh, that Egypt, that the people of Israel will know that the Lord is God. He's greater than all the gods of Egypt. Well, that's exactly what Jethro says here, 11, verse
Right.
11. Now I know that Lord is greater than all gods. And why? Because he did all these wonders. And like you said, he didn't see all of these. He's heard about them, and he trusts the messenger. I mean, his son-in-law is telling him all these things, and he sees the evidence before him, so he believes. And that's 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 faith right there. That's how all faith is pretty much at this point. We see the evidence before us. We trust the messengers that have given us the Bible, so we believe. So that's exactly what Jethro is doing here. And it's interesting that next verse 12, it seems like Jethro was some kind of priest, but was he a priest of God, or kind of like how Melchizedek was a priest
Mhm.
of the Most High, or was he just kind of the priest of his area? Maybe he had some understanding of God, but also worshipped other gods, and that's just how it was back then, just not knowing, not having any very much revelation from God at this point. But Jethro brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and I would assume he offered it, and it was accepted by God. So, and he's accepted by all the elders of Israel, and it says in God's presence. So,
Right.
this foreigner, this non-Israelite is welcomed, and why? It's because of his faith. That statement right beforehand. So I think this is telling of how of the future too. I mean, there's not just the New Testament, or the Old Testament is not just about Israel only. I mean, they're obviously the main characters, but there are tons of instances of non-Israelites that come to know the Lord is greater than all other gods,
Right.
and act accordingly, whether that be Rahab, whether that be Ruth, whoever it is throughout the text. I mean, they're blessed for it. I mean, Jethro gets a pretty big gets a lot of screen time in the Bible because of his faith, and his
Mhm.
of course his association with Moses.
And his wisdom. He plays an excellent role here as a father-in-law. Obviously, it seems that he wants what is best for Moses. He sees Moses as having been a tool that the Lord has used to accomplish great things, which is why whenever we keep reading in verse 13, the next day Moses sat down to judge the people, and they stood around Moses from morning until evening. And when Moses' father-in-law, this is Jethro, saw everything he was doing for them, he asked, "What is this thing you're doing for the people? Why are you sitting alone? Why are you alone sitting as judge, while all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses replied to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. Whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I make a decision between one man and another." I think this is key here. I teach them God's statutes and laws. "What you are doing is not good," Moses' father in law said to him. "You will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you some advice, and God be with you. You will be one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to Him. Instruct them about the statutes and laws, and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people able men, God fearing, trustworthy, and hating dishonest prophets. Place them over the peoples as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They should judge the people at all times. Then they can bring you every major case, but judge every minor case themselves. In this way, you will lighten your load, and they will bear it with you. If you do this, and God so directs you, you'll be able to endure And also all these people will be able to go home satisfied. Moses, we see this good advice from a good father-in-law to the son-in-law, and the son-in-law here has a good response. Moses listened to his father-in-law and in everything he said. So Moses chose able men from all Israel and made them leaders leaders over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They judged the people at all times. They would bring the hard cases to Moses, but they would judge every minor case themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law go, and he journeyed to his own land. Here we have a classic case, Alan, of someone trying to do too much. I can certainly relate to that, and I am thankful for guys like you who during this time have stepped up to help in some of the teaching responsibilities and putting out good content here on Facebook and YouTube. You and me were kind of following along this pattern. There's some things that one person just can't handle on their own. It's good to have people working with you along beside you to accomplish a good task. We see that here. But one thing I noticed this read through that I had not noticed before is the emphasis here that's given to Moses to teach them God's statutes and laws. We were kind of wondering, what have the people been doing prior to the law, capital L law? Well, here it seems they were already being taught that Moses was a prophet of God, and Moses was teaching them God's will, and as you mentioned, preparing them to be able to receive the law from the Lord here in just a couple of chapters.
And I think this is an instance showing that, those later chapters in Exodus don't necessarily all have to be things that Moses received on the mountain. I mean, he might have been receiving some of those minor laws here even before the mountain. So doesn't necessarily, all of that's put after chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments, but I mean, clearly there's some sort of revelation, continually happening from God to Moses. I like the qualifications for these men: able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, and hating dishonest profit. Oh man, if we could have leaders and politicians that just had those four, they were able to do the job, they feared God, and you could trust them to not, use their power to make a bunch of money, then I mean, what kind of society would we have with those kind of leaders?
I think it would be much better than it currently is.
Yep.
I think we might have a couple like this in government, but unfortunately not enough. We need more people like this, for sure. It also reminds me, Alan, of Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 6, excuse me. Acts chapter 6, whenever the church is still in a pretty infant state, and we have the issue in Acts chapter 6 where the Hellenistic widows, the Jews of the dispersion, they were more Greek background Jewish widows. They weren't being fed in the daily distribution of food, is what we read of in Acts 6 and verse 1. The complaint by the Hellenistic Jews against the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. What did the apostles say? We can't handle that too. They've read Exodus chapter 18, haven't they? We can't handle that as well. We're focused in this area. You appoint some people. Let's see, what are those people? They were to be let's see,
good reputation,
full of the Spirit, wisdom, and that we can appoint to this duty. I think those are two pretty similar lists. Whenever you need good work done, you need to get people who love Jesus, love God, number one, that are trustworthy, and that simply can get the job done. No matter your position, I think if you have those three qualities, I think we'll just be all right. Alan, what you got to close us out with today?
That leaves us here at 19. So we'll probably, I think we'll try to cover 19 and then the 10 Commandments. Those 19 is really just kind of the lead up to to those 10 Commandments. So we won't take too long to focus on that. And then, so on Friday, we'll plan on really focusing and reading the first part of chapter 20, which will be the 10 Commandments up until about verse 21, I guess.
Cool. I'll make a note of that so I know where we're stopping. Good deal. Alan, thank you as always for your good insight.
Yeah, thank you.
Preparation. And thank you to those who have joined in with us this afternoon. Hope that you have gained something from this text. I do want to add one more thing. We were talking earlier about the editing thing, and someone might think, well, why would you even bring this up? That could cause people to have some sort of doubts and inspiration or something like that. I would say that it's good for us to know and at least be aware of this, because skeptics will use this. Skeptics will look at this particular text and they'll say, hold on a second. How are they talking about the Sabbath? How are they talking about the law, about the Ark of the Covenant? Whenever these things haven't happened yet, they would look to that. If this is all Moses, they would say that Moses made a mistake or that somebody made a mistake. But if we understand the way that this text was put together and compiled, then we have a very reasonable and plausible explanation to answer those skeptics and the questions they might have against text. But I encourage you to look into that a little more, do your own study and research into that, just so you can have a better grasp on the completion of the Pentateuch and these earliest writings, how they came to be, and just so you have that knowledge to be able to answer people they might have a question about that. Alan, again, thank you. And to our listeners and our watchers, thank you so much. May you have a great rest of your Tuesday. May you have a great rest of your day, or your week. If you are looking for someone to study with online tomorrow, Chris Benson is going to be presenting a class at, I guess, 6:30. I'm not quite sure about the time of that yet. I'll get with him here after we get off, and I'll go ahead and get that scheduled as a live here on Facebook. We'll be doing that on Zoom too, and YouTube as well. He's going to begin a study on the Sermon on the Mount, doing me a huge solid and taking that responsibility off my plate here for a few weeks so I can focus on other things I'm doing right now. And then we'll be back we'll be back Friday here, walking through history at 3:00. And then we'll be worshiping out in our parking lot this upcoming Sunday again at 9 a.m. And I'll have more details about that on Friday. But thank you all so much for being with us again. God bless you. Have a great rest of your day, and we will look forward to seeing you soon. Alan, thank you so much again, buddy.
Hey, thanks for doing all the legwork and putting everything together and doing all the tech work here. All I do is read and study. So
hey, man, I'm glad you got the time and the smarts, the brain power to do that. That's what we need you for, bud. Appreciate it. Thanks,
the time, not as much, but
oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Or the smarts, yeah, really, but.